Yo, what's poppin'? My name is Andrea Baldrias, aka Pariah Carey, aka the Brown Recluse. I am a fourth year sociology undergrad at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and you're listening to Hip Hop Is. Since this is the first episode of the critically acclaimed podcast that we're running here, I wanted to provide y'all some context on who you're listening to and just in general why this is happening, why I feel this is important. So, a couple years back, before I transferred to UCSC, I took a trip to Denmark, and I don't know why this realization happened here, honestly. Just considering demographically where I was at, but I was listening to Tupac's Dear Mama, and I was really listening to the lyrics, and then it just clicked for me that hip hop does not get the intellectual kudos that it deserves. So I took to the streets after that, and by that I mean I went to Instagram and made a post, and I was like, wow, hip hop is empirical evidence to the plight of the Black community. Y'all don't even know. Stay woke. And, I realized that I was not the only one who thought about this. I thought I was spearheading some sort of academic movement, and I was wrong, I'll admit. So if any of y'all knew me during that phase, I was just coming into my own being. I soon after realized that since the 90s, there has been a burgeoning discourse surrounding its use as a pedagogical tool, with contributions from authors like Trisha Rose in her seminal book, Black Noise, in which she used discursive analysis of the lyrical content of hip hop and connected it to its broader sociological use. However, in my daily life, I've noticed that there are still some doubts surrounding its value. When I hear people say they don't like hip hop, it's usually justified by saying they're just talking about drugs and violence. I mean, just the other day, one of my friend's housemates said that she had never vibed with a rapper other than Post Malone. You see, when I hear people say they don't like hip hop, I hear the active dismissal and devaluing of Black voices and experiences. You may think, well, Andrea, come on, look at the mainstream. Does Future saying fish butter, chicken cutter really mean that much to you? And I mean, yeah, you got me there. But the more media I consume and the more I study media, I've come to terms with the fact that the mainstream rarely has provided images of humanizing, multi-dimensional representations of Black people, right? So we can't always base our value judgments on what the mainstream provides us, which I'll elaborate on later. Now, with all that said, this podcast aims to debunk any dismissive judgments you may have about hip-hop. I'm not really even sure if people who don't like hip-hop would listen to this, but just in case you do, hello, welcome. I hope to change your mind. And if you do love hip-hop, I hope this reifies your love for it. So with that said, I hope you enjoy this. I hope that you get something out of every episode. So let's get started. So the topic of today was inspired by Kendrick Lamar's track Element, on which he had a lyric, "What's the difference between Black artists and Wack artists?" And that really got me thinking, how do we determine what is Wack in hip-hop and what is not Wack, or what is authentic and what is inauthentic? So I looked to see if Kendrick and I were on the same wavelength. Side note, we have the same Myers-Briggs. I read that on Google, so it's real credible. But anyway, I thought that maybe we might be thinking the same thing, and he was saying that a Wack artist is somebody who tries to copy another artist. And that kind of aligns with what I was thinking because my definition of whack would be inauthentic. And just from talking to other people who heavily consume hip hop, seeing what they weigh as whack or not whack kind of helped me to determine how I view authenticity. And then I realized real lies, and I was like, wow, when we consider who is and who isn't authentic in hip hop or who is a classic rapper, we often think of the straight black male, right? And we have our classic hip hop artists like Tupac, Biggie, Nas, Snoop Dogg, Dre, Ice Cube. But then we have black men who rap who don't come from the same sort of background as the previously mentioned rappers. Like we have Childish Gambino and Tyler the Creator. And most times within the rap community, we regard them as white rappers or whack rappers because they come from a suburban background or the way that they flow is different than a classic rapper would. Now, just to ground in some media cultural theory, Stuart Hall, in his piece New Ethnicity, states that society views culture in relations of representation. This prompts us to ask questions like, is it good or is it bad? Is it authentic or inauthentic when we interact with culture? I'm here to ask, what if there was neither authentic black culture nor inauthentic black culture? Instead, there was only black culture. And I pose these questions in the context of hip hop because from this cultural sphere, our understanding of what is authentic has become affixed to how we culturally attribute and understand blackness. The reliance on providing a steady, predictable image of what blackness is has resulted in the commodification of authenticity, which is just a nice way of saying the more authentically black we perceive you as, the better. Now, my point of contention is how rappers are maintaining these binary oppositions within the rap community. Rappers who don't look the part or who don't rap about the same experiences are thus ostracized at the expense of discounting their blackness and reifying stereotypes of what blackness should be expressed as. Because the truth is, blackness isn't just being a black straight male. There are so many other intersecting identities and ways in which we lie on the spectrum of blackness. There's location, there's socioeconomic status, there's sexuality, there's gender, there's able-bodiedness. There are many other perspectives that we aren't getting in hip-hop. And hip-hop as a cultural arena has bolstered the narratives of black males, which is great. I'm not saying don't value the voices of black men. I'm just saying that there are so many other voices that could be at the forefront as well. I mean, the fact that we have to use terms that are distinguishing, like female rappers or gay rappers, lesbian rappers, trans rappers, it is very telling of how we think of a rapper. If I were to ask you to name female rappers, you'd probably say Nicki, Missy Elliott, MC Lyte, Princess Nokia, Lil' Kim, Cardi B. Great, but there's so many more. What about classic rappers like Bahamadia, The Conscious Daughters, Yo-Yo, and newer ones, Carrie Foe, Baby Mother? They're all iconic and they're all authentic. And for LGBTQ plus identifying rappers, how many can you name? There's Kevin Abstract of Brockhampton, Cakes Tequila, Cupcake, Die Burger, Mickey Blanco, Big Freedia, Angel Hayes, Michelle Nadegiocello, Quay Dash. And my point here isn't just to throw a bunch of names at you and snatch you in the process. What I'm saying is that there is a whole scope of narratives and individuals and ways of being black that aren't really uplifted in the rap community. Now, historically, we have always regarded the narratives of black straight males. Malcolm X, MLK, Huey Newton, Stokely Carmichael, Fred Hampton, all black men, all highly regarded, all highly quoted. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with uplifting the black male voice. It's just when that voice renders invisible the other voices of the community who are more disenfranchised, who have less opportunities, then we have a problem. And I think that we need to be proactive in providing opportunities to uplift the voices of the most disenfranchised. And I say this to connect back to the rap community as well, just like with the female rappers and the LGBTQ plus rappers that I identified. So if you were to visit the Black Lives Matter herstory online, you would read about how they were very intentional with who they wanted to be at the forefront of this movement. Now, if we look at history, like I said, Black straight men are often regarded as the figureheads of these movements. And Alicia, Patrice, and Opal were very intentional about bringing up the most disenfranchised, which would be ultimately the Black, trans, disabled woman. Now, until she is free, we are not free. Decade after decade, we have obfuscated the narrative of the most marginalized within the Black community. And I think that we are in a political moment and a social moment where we are using media to be more intentional about who we are bringing forward. My pitch to you is that in a space that was created to celebrate Blackness, such as hip hop, we should be disappointed that there is an underwhelming representation of the rest of the Black community, because we're not all just straight Black men. Who was the last transcendentally successful LGBTQ plus rapper? How many have there been, if any? It's just not who sells. It's not what audiences ask for or expect from hip hop. So when we keep this image of the hyper-masculine, able-bodied, survival-driven Black male, we, as Stuart Hall says in What is This Black in Black Popular Culture, quote, are tempted to display that signifier as a device that can purify the impure, bring the straying brothers and sisters who don't know what they ought to be doing in line, and police the boundaries that are, of course, political, symbolic, and positional boundaries, as if they were genetic, end quote. What he is saying is when we naturalize traits, location, appearances, and beliefs to be inherently Black, we are categorizing and limiting what individuals are allowed to express while Black. And it seems that it's often a choice between the group or the individual. While I do believe that cultural characteristics can be adopted and celebrated, it feels counterproductive and limiting to say, you do blank because you're Black, or you can't like this, you're Black, as opposed to saying, you like this and you are Black. The way that we cling on to authenticity is a microcosmic example of Stuart Hall's roots tourism. Hall defines roots tourism as a type of tourism in which ethnic minorities visit their ancestral lands to discover ethnic roots in culture. This is from his piece Cultural Identity and Diaspora. He also describes roots tourism as the romanticization of Africa by positioning it as the origin and the place of return. It is a primitivist take on Africa, just as the propagation of original imagery of authentic rappers is a primitivist perspective on hip-hop. Who determines the validity of these representations, and what is their consumer value? The fervor with which antiquated gangsta imagery is held onto blights the fundamentally transformative culture of hip-hop. Because hip-hop is a wonderful countercultural space, a place to be unapologetically Black, and that could be at any intersection or expression of Black identity. Now we've seen this. Hip-hop changes with generations, visually, sonically, linguistically, and that's beautiful, and it deserves to be celebrated. But we should be able to speak about rappers in the same regard when we consider who is authentic without measuring them against this specific mold that started out from its conception. We can't put all the blame on the rappers, though, because the political economy of these rappers determines what we see and what we hear. I use the term political economy in reference to Robert McChesney's Political Economy of Media. He refers to political economy as the comprehensive analysis of the economic and political powers that consolidate the private control of media to increase profit. That's just a long way of saying we need to understand what corporations are in control of various media industries. According to hip-hop magazine The Source, in the early 1990s, 70% of hip-hop consumers were white, which I'm sure translates over to today, if not more. With that said, it would make sense that managers and the industry would want to appeal to the audiences. What sells? that which fascinates you. And what is more fascinating than an experience that you've never had and never will? When white audiences ask for authentic rappers, they are asking for the rappers that they have constructed. They have produced the image of someone who is stupid, lazy, aggressive, and dangerous, someone who is deserving of coercive forms of social control, which further creates an inferiority complex in a people when we see audiences reacting to blackness as such. From this, it is understandable why rappers often adopt a persona when they perform. The blurred line between performer and individual maintains a racial performativity, though. Pseudonyms like Snoop Dogg or 50 Cent allow them to put on a mask and become the caricature that white audiences will consume. However, this aspect of performance is not unprecedented. For example, Burt Williams, a light-skinned black man of Caribbean descent, was asked to present Darker in theater. He had to put coal on his face in order to be seen as an authentic performer of black culture. And more radically, in a YouTube series I watched titled Rap Sessions, a cultural scholar Mark Anthony Neal posits that there's a connection to minstrelsy. And while it's not white people dressing up in blackface depicting negative tropes, the white audiences, with help from white managers or business owners in the industry, invest in seeing particular images of black people acting thuggish, aggressive, or hypersexually. Bell Hooks, in her 1994 essay, Postmodern Blackness, addresses the industry artist dynamic that proves difficult for artists to create their own representations. She says, quote, attempts on the part of editors and publishing houses to control and manipulate the representation of black culture, as well as their desire to promote the creation of products which will attract the widest audience, limit, in a crippling and stifling way, the kind of work many black folks feel we can do and still receive recognition. By stifling black representations, our understandings of and interactions with black culture becomes monolithic and simplified, thus reflected in our interactions with black people in society. Attitudes and characteristics of black people have been imposed and projected upon since colonization. Now, my point in saying all of this is that we really have the power to determine what voices we lift up and which ones we further obscure. And I think that by buying into specific images of rappers because we deem them authentic, further marginalizes voices that we can relate to or that most of the black community can relate to. So all of that being said, I want you to keep in mind the various layers behind the decision to call a rapper authentic or inauthentic. It is important to be cognizant of our demand for or judgment of authenticity and how it limits our understandings of what blackness is, because ultimately it can be and is anything and everything. That's all the time that we have for today. In our next episode, we will be in conversation about Chicago's drill scene with Minneapolis born and raised Dr. Charity Clay. Dr. Clay is a sociology professor at Merritt College in Oakland. However, she is not only an advocate for hip-hop scholarship, but a hip-hop artist herself. So to end, I'll play the track Diamond in the Rough off her Smokey Winston project, released in 2010. Once again, I'm Andrea Baldrius, and thank you for listening to Hip Hop Is.
Yo, I come from a strong house built on shaky ground, where the cops quick to shake it down, cause they fit the profile if your face is brown, and you dress like the niggas that you hang around, yeah, they'll take you down to the station, try to get a statement by telling you all about the time that you facing, and some get complacent, start cooperating, and I ain't saying don't snitch shit, I'm just saying the karma's a bitch and the players keep playing, and every day niggas lose their space and just get replaced, cause the game don't stop like the hands on the clock, and you can get clapped just like that at the drop of a hat, or better yet the drop of a dime, or drop over iron the wrong dimes behind, cause it's a fine line between life and dying. It's sorta like the curb, it separates the street from the sidewalk, and I wasn't there who stayed in beef, cause how I talk, smart chick with a smart mouth, never start shit, but it followed me when I stepped up the house, and I tried to keep my hands clean. See, I I was in the hoop and hoodlums told me do the damn thing. The good kid in the hood, the girl with the book route. Tried to play the corners, but I never made it higher than the lookout. I told them peeps when the cops was coming, and in return them peeps, they look out for a youngin'. I went to the corner store, never paid for nothing. Stopped getting jumped by Shanika and her cousins, and I loved it. The hood taught me valuable lessons. How anything you pick up in a fight is a weapon or a shield. And don't be scared to take a punch to keep your lunch, cause in the day, them scars will heal. And if you pass the test, then you will get respect. But if you back down, then you gonna get messed with. So when they knock me down, I will come up swinging. Not soft just because I had a good upbringing. See, moms and pops taught me not to be a slave. That the system was corrupt, but still get good grades. Got word from the teachers that I was a problem, but did they own research and wouldn't let them Medicaid. Pops worked for the city, we wasn't on Medicaid. Mom's real greedy, stay scheming on ways of getting paid. They took me in with a hug and kiss. From my pops, I got patience. My mama gave me stubbornness. Streets gave me courage, and the fam gave encouragement. Between the two, I got a double dose of nourishment. Double dose of knowledge from street scholars in college. Product of it all, so all I acknowledge. The diamond in the rough that got polished.